Hello. Good morning. So, over the next few hours, you're going to hear how to do some amazing things with free software. Speakers from all over Europe have come to tell you how to build communities, how to teach people important life skills, how to map cities, and even how to sell physical goods using the power of open source. That's all coming up. But I'm not going to tell you how to do anything with free software. Instead, we'll hear how one of the world's most popular open source applications is challenging America's largest tech companies on new platforms with new applications and the engines that are currently driving this process. I'm talking, of course, about LibreOffice. And I'm wondering how many people in here have never, ever used LibreOffice? I see no hands. That's great. So my job isn't quite done, because I think there's some developments you've never heard of, even if you're following it closely. But I'm going to start off by explaining the products that we currently have, the products that LibreOffice is currently offering to the world. So this is LibreOffice Desktop, what most people think about when they hear the word LibreOffice. This is an application with a 30-year history. It goes back to a German company called Star Division. In 1985, they were creating an Office application that was later bought by Sun Microsystems, open sourced, and became OpenOffice.org. When that company was acquired by Oracle, there was some disagreement about how to run things, and a fork happened 4 years ago called LibreOffice, which is where we are now. After LibreOffice, the OpenOffice source code was donated to the Apache Foundation, and the ecosystem continues to grow. But LibreOffice Desktop is where we're coming from. Where we're going to is Android. We have 3 different LibreOffice apps now available on Android. 2 of them in the Google Play Store, 1 of them a prototype. Here we see the LibreOffice viewer for Android. It's created by Collabora and supports a wide variety of document formats, including Microsoft Office format and Open Document format. We're updating this almost every 2 weeks at the moment. I'll tell you more about how this came into being and why in a few minutes. We also have LibreOffice Kit. Now, this is something that you will possibly have never seen because it's not very visible. LibreOffice Kit is a back-end application. It's actually a library that provides a stable API for integration into third-party systems. In this screenshot, we see an application that was built using the Qt GUI toolkit, very simply to show documents using LibreOffice in the back end with a very thin front end. LibreOffice Kit is what's driving LibreOffice onto new platforms, and again, I'll explain how it's taking us to the cloud in just a moment. But these applications, they are the result of community work, and everything that's driving the progress in LibreOffice right now are people like these. Here we see our Japanese LibreOffice local team here in Tokyo for Document Freedom Day. Here we see our New Hampshire LibreOffice team celebrating Document Freedom Day. And in the middle here, we have Robin Tryon, who's our current QA manager. So more than the products, LibreOffice is the community that make them. And like the products, the community is currently undergoing rapid growth. That community includes growth into business users. We have 18,000 desktop computers in the city of Munich running LibreOffice right now. The city has its own internal technical departments providing support, maintenance, and code fixes for LibreOffice. The number of business users is also growing rapidly, and they're an important part of the community that's growing the ecosystem. And finally, we have the advisory board and the larger legal infrastructure community around LibreOffice. That includes all the companies that you see here, some of which you'll be familiar with, Intel, Red Hat, SUSE, and some which you may not have heard of, smaller companies which are also on the advisory board. Additionally, we have various committees on membership of the Document Foundation, which is a registered charity in Germany. We have steering committees on different technical subjects, including on Android. And we have a much wider membership, which is people who want to contribute to the Document Foundation with ideas or time and apply on the premise they're going to support the work for at least 6 months. So, all these applications, we're growing onto new platforms, and we're also growing in terms of the number of users, as I've said. It's not enough that LibreOffice comes pre-installed with the Linux distributions you may be looking at right now. We need LibreOffice to penetrate markets which we, as open source enthusiasts, don't always reach. We need Windows users, we need Mac users, we need enterprise users, we need school users, we need users everywhere. And that's why it's critical that we measure the growth, and I have some numbers for you. It's actually pretty difficult to measure how many people are using LibreOffice, because unlike the applications which are probably running on the smartphone in your pocket right now, we can't hide code that tracks who you are and what you do, and we don't want to do that. But that means that, unlike all those applications, we don't have a clear view of the users that we have and where they are. We do have an automated update mechanism which asks LibreOffice servers if there's a newer version and if it can install them. That gives us one view into how many users that we have. And that number, the last time I checked, was 120 million copies of LibreOffice. That means that we know there are at least 120 million computers out there that on a monthly basis are asking our servers for updated information about LibreOffice binaries. However, this isn't that accurate, unfortunately. We can tell it's doubled in the last 12 months, but we can't tell, for example, if this machine is running LibreOffice because Linux distributions don't package the update mechanism in the LibreOffice binaries that they ship. On top of that, the millions of users that we have in public sector, they are generally working behind firewalls because, surprise, surprise, their system administrators don't like the idea of their users managing their own software and installing updates when they fancy. So we probably have a good few more million users than we see here. But it's a really nice measuring point. And as I say, we can see it's doubled in this time frame. We know that there are at least 18 governments who have officially deployed LibreOffice. When I say 18, I mean 18 government departments who have been happy to publicly state and acknowledge their use of LibreOffice. We know that there are more governments using it, but we're still working on getting them to fess up. We have at least 1 million LibreOffice users in Brazil, 15,000 in Munich officially, and 500,000 in the French police force. To make those organizations' experience of LibreOffice possible, they need commercial support. And LibreOffice support is available from companies in at least 21 countries as of today. That might not be very relevant to you as a power user who's happy to maintain your own installation, but in terms of growing the investment in LibreOffice, in terms of getting LibreOffice into universities like this one, it's generally imperative that there's a local support network to provide professional services. And we're working on growing that. Now, all these users, all these growing users, and these new platforms, they put an awful lot of pressure on the people that are making LibreOffice to produce a quality product. Every time we have a new release, and we have new major releases every 6 months, and minor releases generally every month, every time we issue a new release, our users expect something that is stable, that is at least as good as the last release, and on top of that, something that has generally new features worth installing. So when you think about competing desktop Office suites, pause for a moment and think how many millions have been invested, or how many hundreds of millions have been invested in those applications over the course of their life. Perhaps consider how much your own government has already spent in license fees for proprietary offices, and then think of the annual budget of the Document Foundation and the task that we face in producing something as good and as featureful with a fraction of the resources. How do we do it? Well, true to open source, we collaborate. We rely on a lot of people giving their time for free and for a salary. We rely on investment by companies and institutions. We rely on efficient organization and management. And together, we build this thing. We build it at conferences, like the LibreOffice conference, which happens once every year, depicted here in Bern in Switzerland last September. These conferences are critical for new users of LibreOffice to come together, ask for features, for governments like Swiss Post to approach companies who provide support for LibreOffice and ask them for example, secure PDF signing, which came out of the last LibreOffice conference. They provide opportunities for professional training, which the Document Foundation also offers. You can get a certificate in migration to LibreOffice. You can get a certificate as a LibreOffice engineer. You can also get a certificate as a LibreOffice trainer. We have a peer-to-peer review program, which takes place at these events. For more focused work, we come together in Hackfests. The last Hackfest focused on the user interface, something probably a lot of you are very interested in hearing more about, and resulted in a new icon set, which we'll be releasing in LibreOffice 5. Hackfests are a perfect opportunity for new contributors to learn the tool chain, how to get involved with LibreOffice. I'll be speaking more about its code base in a minute, but it's pretty big. Learning your way around it, we've got great documentation. Doing it at a Hackfest, it's so much easier. This Hackfest is in Munich, sponsored by the city. We've got another one coming up in England in just a few days. But engineers, code, even the companies who are buying support for LibreOffice, that's only part of the ecosystem, because no matter how hard we work, no matter how great our engineers are, we will never have true interoperability between Office suites unless we have the cooperation of companies like Microsoft and Google. Because compatibility isn't something one company can generally deliver, at least not in our current legal climate. That's why at PlugFest events, we bring together HP, Google, Microsoft, a whole host of other companies who work on Office documents. We sit them down and we make them talk about how they're going to make their files work with our files and our files work with theirs. These events are really important for political reasons. It prevents companies from squirming away from the fact that they aren't supporting something which they should, for example. It allows us to really shine a torchlight on where compatibility problems still exist and who's responsible for them. That's why at the PlugFest, it was great to see the British government actually hosting the event. It's called Number 10 because it was number 10, but it was also hosted by Number 10, which is the number on the street where the British Prime Minister lives. Out of this event, Google announced renewed support for ODF in Google Docs, and the British government stated a plan to migrate all of their offices to open document format in the coming years. So, as well as those kind of events, conferences, PlugFests, we have students working on interoperability, and as those talks continue, we have people like Sihi Liu here at the bottom left, and Mikhail Vajna at the top left, who are all past Google Summer of Code students. Mikhail, top left, for example, he implemented improved rich text format filters, sponsored by Google, 2 summers ago. All these students are now employed as full-time engineers working on LibreOffice as a result of their work on the Google Summer of Code program. 3 weeks ago, LibreOffice had accepted another 12 students for this year's Google Summer of Code program. So if you're interested in getting involved, it's a great way to get paid to make free software. We also have mentoring programs. These two guys, Tobias and Jennifer on the left, They were sponsored by the City of Munich as part of their degree to work on a new scheduling system built into LibreOffice, which has already cut down the boot time of the application significantly. They had a mentor, Michael Meeks, who I also work with, and people like this contribute significant code while studying. But they aren't the only ones contributing. They make, in addition, we have all the companies listed on the right. These are the top committers to the LibreOffice codebase. Maybe you recognize Ericsson, IBM, Munich. Maybe you recognize SUSE and Red Hat there. You can see how many contributions they've made in terms of commits in the chart. These are companies that complement the work of the volunteers and developers that I've just been talking about with significant paid consulting work. These are companies who are building LibreOffice for their own interest. They're building LibreOffice because it's important for other products that they're selling. The top 3 committers we see on the right, we have Red Hat. On the left, we have Collabora. And in the middle, that blue block, those are volunteers who are unassigned to any company currently. We can also see the number of commits increasing year on year. Here we see the committers per month, and again, the top committers. In fact, in the middle, new contributions here are accounting for, in total, about 2,000 commits per month. So, how, you might be asking, are these companies making back their investment on LibreOffice? I've explained that they're a critical part, and we've seen how many contributions they make on a monthly basis. Can you sell LibreOffice? Yes, you can. In fact, SUSE, Red Hat, and Collabora all have their own versions of the application, which they package for different purposes. Red Hat, for example, has a vested interest in an Office suite which works well on their desktop products, just like SUSE. SUSE and Red Hat combined have invested significantly in LibreOffice over recent years. The LibreOffice trademark is pretty flexible. It's incorporated into a variety of different brands, and as you can see here, it results in separate products. So let's go into a bit more depth into how one of these companies packages LibreOffice and gets their investment made. I work for Collabora, and I'm now switching my hat from the Document Foundation to Collabora, if that makes sense, and I've rebranded the slides effectively. So Collabora, as we saw 2 slides ago, is one of the leading contributors to LibreOffice currently. We measure this in terms of the number of commits and the version control system we use, which is Git. Collabora has offices in Cambridge and Montreal. It's a purely open source consultancy company. Everything that they do is contributed back to open source projects. And currently we have around 80 staff. Among those staff are half of the top committers to LibreOffice and 12 Document Foundation certified engineers. An example of one project that we recently completed on LibreOffice was improving performance of spreadsheets. So we had a customer that approached us and they said, we deal with a lot of big spreadsheets. Google Docs isn't powerful enough for us because we need hundreds of thousands of rows on several sheets. Specifically, they said, we need documents with 8 spreadsheets with 100,000 rows in each to work faster on LibreOffice than they do in Microsoft Excel. We said, okay, we'll give it a shot. The result was the largest single refactoring work that LibreOffice has ever undertaken. We worked with teams across multiple companies, with multiple disciplines, to work on every aspect of Calc performance. It's interesting that Calc was actually the degree to which Calc internals were object-orientated before we started this was getting absurd. Every cell was a separate object. That meant that we had let's just say the profiling meant that we changed that. After the work that was completed, let's see the graph. You can see at the top the processing speed for loading one of these spreadsheets before the work was completed. At the bottom, you can see the time it took after the work was completed. And in the middle, you can see Microsoft Excel's reference time. So if we go back here, the difference was 40 seconds to 4. This is work that Collabora was hired to do, and it's in this version of LibreOffice that the laptop is now running. If any of you have got it installed, you're also benefiting from these performance improvements. Yeah. It also resulted in the single largest increase in unit tests to the Calc source code. They weren't just related to the work that was done, in fact, but they are now protecting us all from regressions in other features in that application. Unit testing and quality is something that we've really been working on and is important for some of our large corporate customers. And again, I've got some more stats coming up. Some more consulting that Collabora did. LibreOffice on Android, the direct result of a company called Smoose. They approached Collabora and said, hey, we need a document rendering engine that will work on tablets inside an application that we ship. At this time, LibreOffice was a purely desktop product. LibreOffice Kit, which I mentioned earlier, got a huge boost out of this. We had to turn 8 million lines of code into an APK which fitted into 50 megabytes, which is the restriction imposed by the Google Play Store. Now, that was quite a challenge. We had to rip out the existing user interface, make this third-party library, and that's what's driving this new UI. This is a completely custom interface. It's built using Firefox, Firefox rendering engine. Firefox did a lot of great plumbing, let's say, on Android when they introduced Firefox for Android, Fennec as it was called at the time. We've reused a whole load of those components to produce tiling that scrolls smoothly. And finally, our most recent announcement was LibreOffice Online. Now, similar to Android, a company called iSwap, which makes private business servers, they said, hey, we're not so happy about the fact that our customers are looking at products from Microsoft and Google for Office and collaboration. We want an open source system which everybody can benefit from to render documents in the browser and edit collaboratively. As a result, we're now working on LibreOffice Online, and you can read more about it in the recent announcement that I presented. I've actually got a video of that coming up as well. So, yeah, quality results. As I mentioned earlier, unit tests are something that we've been growing. And in order to compete with those American companies I've been mentioning, we need to be really hot on quality. Some of our customers, in fact, use LibreOffice because they have more insight into the code and the performance that it has than any of their proprietary competitors. For example, if you're the Department of Defense in the United States and you're thinking, I want to know exactly how this code works, how well it's going to perform in this situation, and I want to make sure I can test it in some unusual environment, having access to the source code is pretty critical. We use a company called Coverity, which works with the Department of Defense in the United States to analyze LibreOffice source code, all those millions of lines that I mentioned, and find problems before they actually affect a user. So we've been working with Coverity for several years now, and they do static code analysis, which gives us insight into how many problems we can predict before compile time. Other applications, including the Linux kernel, are also using Coverity. Mozilla is using Coverity. And again, it's not something that you can use on something like Microsoft Office because they'd need to provide the source code to do so. But we do have numbers. In fact, when we look at the average number of problems, and this is measured as a quality score orientated around the number of issues per 1,000 lines of code, or as represented here, per 100,000 lines of code, we see that LibreOffice has gone from, I think it was 1.1, the quality score, down to very nearly 0. We're currently hovering around 0.01, which means one problem per 100,000 lines of code, according to one of the most authoritative static analysis companies in the United States. That's the result of, I think, 5,000 commits from memory, directly fixing the problems which Coverity has identified. The average quality score for an application of similar complexity in the proprietary software world is 0.71. The average quality score, interestingly, of open source applications of similar complexity is 0.61. So when we found that we were close to 0, the company Coverity, they actually issued a press release about LibreOffice as a case example of how applications can benefit from using their product. So we can see that these improvements are way above average because of the transparency of the application. On top of Coverity tests, we also have automated testing. including 76,000 documents, which people like you have submitted to our Bugzilla bug tracker. These are the worst of the worst documents. These are documents which reliably crash, have weird formatting, were created by some strange Frankenstein application, have embedded media of all sorts, but comply more or less with document standards. We have 150,000 which we export automatically. This means that we have a server with all these files, importing and exporting them automatically and making sure that there are no crashes and that there are no problems repeated, which we've already found before. When you report a bug to Bugzilla, you might think, you know, it gets ignored. Well, most likely if you attach a document, it's one of these. It's growing day by day, and currently we're generating 180 gigabytes of trash documents every time we run this system. We actually had to get a new server at the Document Foundation. It's got 64 cores, and it takes 1 day to execute each one of these 2 sets of tests. In addition to the import and export tests, we have Address Sanitizer running on a server. This is an open source library from Google. It checks for crashing errors, stack overflows, buffer overflows. It's pretty slow, and it takes currently 5 days to run on a 64-core machine on the latest LibreOffice builds, but it does protect us, me and you, from all sorts of errors that we previously weren't catching. Now, we don't know what our competitors are doing in terms of this kind of testing, but in relation to the products that we do know and the testing rigs that they do have, this is pretty cutting edge. How do these tests actually affect your experience, you might ask? Well, as I said, we have fewer crashes, we have fewer regressions, and we generally have benchmarking, which gives us a pretty clear idea of when these problems are being introduced. So, 4.4 improvements. Who here is already running LibreOffice 4.4 and knows about it? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Not on here, you're not. Oh, okay. So LibreOffice 4.4 is the most recent release of the application, and we're seeing some benefits from the work that we've been talking about on mobile and cloud in that release. Seeing as you're all using LibreOffice, as you told me at the beginning, I thought you might be interested to see some of the features that will be included when the rest of you upgrade. We have improved read-only mode. This means those times when you get a document from Google Drive and you open it and you can't edit a damn thing and you don't know why, and you're clicking around and you're trying to look in the edit menu and find how you can change the document that you've got. Well, now you have a nice pop-up that says this document is in read-only mode. We have improved Firefox themes, meaning that you can customize how Firefox looks. You can brand it to your company, to a university. We have a theme browser, as illustrated here, which means right from within LibreOffice, you can browse themes just like you can on Firefox. You can still import them locally if you want. I used this feature myself for Document Freedom Day, a campaign about document interoperability. For all of the demo machines that were using LibreOffice for that day, and we had, I think, 61 events in 30 countries this year, they were using a Document Freedom Day theme for LibreOffice, meaning that when a new user approached it for the first time, it provided the same branding as they were familiar with from the other events going on that day. Here we go, Pretier themes. The themes that I was just talking about now apply to more of the application, so they're at the bottom and at the top. They theme more of the menus, and they just generally have a more cohesive feel. We have support for more colors and palettes. We have a color picker built right in. Those of you who are used to doing design work with LibreOffice Draw, for example, might be tired of going through the options menu every time you want to add a custom color. Well, you can forget about that because it's now built in right into the toolbar. We also have support for Adobe color palettes in this release and better handling of ProPrint colors like CMYK. We have support for embedded 3D graphics in LibreOffice 4.4. This is via the Kronos Collada 3D file type. You can export those from Blender, from 3D Studio Max. They can be interactive, and you can embed them directly in presentations. You can do things like walkthroughs of a house embedded in the slide now. And we have improved support for 3D charting. This was actually an experimental feature in previous versions, but it means, for example, if I was presenting data about the stock market, I could have embedded right in my slide live data streamed from the internet, represented as a changing 3D graph in my presentation. You can stream data from a variety of supported data sources. Now, when you're in LibreOffice Calc, it's just data streaming. And we have the PDF certificate signing that I mentioned earlier. Now, if you do work in a government organization, or you do in future, then you'll learn that handling of documents can be pretty tight. This actually came via Swiss organizations. A group of them came together at the last LibreOffice conference in Bern, and they said the Swiss judiciary, when you submit legal documents to Swiss courts, it has to have evidence included that it's from you as the original sender. It can't be spoofed or faked, and it must also be time-stamped. This is also a requirement for Swiss Post and a number of other Swiss businesses. So what happened was we crowdfunded these features. An organization, Wilhelm Tux, which is not dissimilar from the Linux user groups you have here, they got businesses together who needed secure signing of PDFs generated by LibreOffice, and they raised a few tens of thousands of euros, which was enough to get these features implemented for the next version of LibreOffice. Collabora's Tor Lilquist implemented these features. We already have SSL signatures supported in LibreOffice 4.4, and timestamping, which will prove exactly when you generated your document, is ready and will be included in LibreOffice 5.0. This is a nice example of the community interacting directly with developers and features that people need coming about in a very short turnaround time. Try doing that with Google Docs. LibreOffice 5 is coming up at the end of July, and we have especially changed the UI in this release. We have a completely new icon set with over 150 icons that is themed much more like KDE and Windows desktops. We have my personal favorite feature, high-resolution screen support is greatly improved in this. My laptop just over there, it's got 4,000 pixels on it, and a lot of apps look pretty rubbish right now. But in LibreOffice 5, the menus, the cursors, the icons, and the themes will all scale to high-resolution screens. We have improved usability on the sidebar. I don't know how many people are using the LibreOffice sidebar, but in my opinion, you should. It's really convenient, and you can preview the style that you would apply to your text on the left. And on the right, you can see we have change tracking UI implemented in the sidebar too, meaning that when you have that essay you've sent to somebody else to review, you get it back, you can see every change they've made, when they made it, and you can accept or reject every change independently of the other. We have improved support for Microsoft OOXML file types. Especially, we've been working on backgrounds, shadows, hinting in this release. You'd be surprised how bad a document can look when the background of the text or the shadow isn't quite right. Well, that's all fixed in the next release, and in fact, you can choose whether to prioritize how the text looks in LibreOffice or in Microsoft Office. We have various other improvements, as we can see here. We have different labeling of bar graphs. You can apply gradients and backgrounds to charts. It's not the most exciting, but it's important if you work with a lot of data. And we have more configurable pivot tables, including multiple labels and so on and so forth. This was done by a volunteer, Dina Francis. Indeed. I mentioned the color palettes support from Adobe earlier. And perhaps something that's more interesting to you guys is OpenGL support being built into the core of LibreOffice. This means that the hardware on your device will be able to accelerate the processing of rendering of images. The images should look better, and your fans should spin less on your CPU. This is something that we're continuing to work on, and OpenGL should see a lot more improvements in upcoming releases. So, those are the changes that we're expecting in LibreOffice 5. And LibreOffice Online, will the video work? Yes, here you can see LibreOffice Online in action. Now, this document is the same document we've seen in several other slides, but the difference is this is being rendered on a server, sent via JavaScript and HTML5 to your browser, and rendered using the Leaflet tiling engine. I don't know if any of you have used OpenStreetMap in a web browser, but one of the most popular ways to deploy Leaflet is this same JavaScript library. Basically, the approach that we're taking in LibreOffice is do the hard work on the server, send the images to the client. That means that your mobile can render documents as well as your desktop could, because the server in the back end is doing the grunt work. More importantly, it means that the documents that you end up viewing in a browser should look identical to how they appear on the desktop. And that's not something that any other product on the market currently can do. If you look at apps that are rendered locally from Office 365, or if you look at the basic editing that Google Docs provides, you can't have more complex formatting there. You can't have large images which will block your little mobile browser. You can't handle spreadsheets beyond a certain size, and you certainly can't handle formulas. Well, by the end of this year, LibreOffice Online should be ready to go. We have LibreOffice on Android, as I've mentioned, but what I didn't mention is that we have an editing app as well for Android. I recently wrote this up and published a prototype APK. As you can see in these pictures, on an Android phone, you can now edit in Impress, CLUC, or Writer. We also have a prototype of the Draw application, meaning that right on your tablet or mobile device, you have a fully fledged, locally running, native document editor. That's open source. This is something we're continuing to work on, and if you want to follow the process, look at the tdf.org or on LibreOffice from Collabora. So, you drive progress. You really do. It's the UI improvements that we've seen in LibreOffice 5, they've come from volunteers just like you. The menu improvements, the Windows 64 build, even the name of LibreOffice 5 was submitted by community members. We've seen how Google Summer of Code students have written some of the most important file format support in recent versions of LibreOffice. And the process of developing LibreOffice on Android, that's open. Collabora is open, the Document Foundation is open, the code is all on public Git repositories, and you can build them yourself and try them out right now. Might take a while, by the way, to build LibreOffice Desktop. Yeah, don't leave your laptop on a duvet. Make sure it's got some good ventilation, because I saw some, bad results. I'd like to tell you about the next LibreOffice Hackfest, which is coming up later this month. It's actually later this week, in fact, in Cambridge. It coincides with the beer festival. If you want to go there, if you want some help getting there, please talk to me. We'll be working on the mobile application especially at this Hackfest. And we have the LibreOffice conference coming up in Denmark in September. So that's a great opportunity to get involved and meet the people who are running the show. LibreOffice Kit, as I've mentioned, is the engine that's driving these new applications on mobile and cloud. And we'd really love your help planning how to improve this and how to plan it going forward. So that's been me. I'm Sam Tuke, and thank you for listening.